Hello, my name is Cabral Williams. For this capstone, I'm taking on the role of a motivation psychologist to share what I learned applying situated expectancy value theory in a real tutoring relationship. My central message is this. When a learner says I can't, the barrier is very often not about skill at all. It's about what they expect, what they value, and what success might cost them. I'll walk you through the theory, in this case of a kindergarten reader I'll call Jada, the specific things I did, and the strategies you can carry into your own work with anyone who's started to give up on themselves. Let me introduce the case. I'm going to call the student Jada. She's a black kindergarten student I worked with as an after school reading tutor and mentor, developing her phonemic awareness and phonics, sounding out and blending simple words. Here's the key. Her problem was motivational, not cognitive. She called herself someone who can't read, and she rarely tried to sound out or blend a word without prompting. She quit at the very first mistake. Underneath that, she had recently moved into a foster care situation, which took her sense of self, and she started to feel that tutoring pulled her away from her friends and from who she is. Everything I tried before, reteaching the content, tactical activities, all had failed because those efforts treated this as a skill defect and completely ignored two things: her expectation of failure and the identity cost she attached to succeeding. So, what's the theory? Expectancy value theory says achievement behavior is driven by two things working together: expectancy, how well I expect to perform, and value, how much the task matters to me. And that product is then offset by cost, what the task will take from me. Think of it like a formula: expectancy times value minus cost. If either expectancy or value is near zero, motivation collapses, and a high enough cost can sink the whole thing. Now, the word situated matters. Excel and Wingfield in 2020 renamed the model situated expectancy value theory to emphasize that these beliefs are not just fixed traits that a child is born with. They are shaped by culture and by caretakers and educators around the learner. That's actually the hopeful part. If beliefs are shaped by relationships, then a tutor is a position to reshape them. Value isn't a single dial. It has parts, and knowing which part is low tells you what to do. There's interest value, the plain enjoyment of task. There's attainment value, how central the task is to you. Does succeeding even fit your identity? And there's utility value, how useful the task is for goals you care about. For Jada, the missing pieces wasn't mainly interest or utility, it was attainment value. Reading simply didn't feel like it belonged to her. So my job wasn't to sell her on phonics, it was to make succeeding feel like an expression of who she is rather than a betrayal of it. Here's the piece that most educators would miss, and it turned out to be central for Jada. Matthew and Wingfield in 2024 extended situation expectancy value theory through a critical race lens. Two ideas. First, racialized opportunity cost. Cost isn't only task level, like this is hard. Students of color can pay a psychosocial, symbolic, and community cost when they pursue success in spaces they are overlooked and undervalued. Succeeding can feel like leaving your people behind. Second, they reimagine value itself through what they frame as black pride, attainment and interest, values tied to racial identity, belonging, and collective joy, rather than an isolated delight in a task. Put those together and you can see Jada's real barrier. For her, becoming a reader carried an identity cost, and the fix was to reconnect reading to her identity and community, not to drill more phonics. The reason this framework is so useful is that it treats expectancy and value as malleable levers. So diagnosing which lever was stuck told me exactly where to push. Three things were happening at once for Jada. One, low expectancy, a fractured self-concept of ability. I can't, before she even tried. The response is to raise expectancy through engineered successes, which Bandura's work on self-values points to. Two, a high racialized cost, the identity and community cost of becoming a reader, The response is to lower that cost by making success continuous with her identity rather than departed from it. And three, missing attainment value. Reading felt disconnected from who she is, which I build through belonging and shared joy. One diagnosis, three targeted levers. Now the acts. The actual things I did over 8 weekly sessions. Act 1 targeted expectancy, and it leaned on Bandura's finding that mastery experiences are the strongest source of self value. In plain terms, nothing convinces you you can do something like actually doing it. So I engineered wins. I scaffolded every consonant, vowel, consonant word, broke it into small segments, and had her hear the sounds first, then say them aloud, one at a time, and supported her as she blended them. I made those wins visible by keeping tactical tiles as a running record of every sound she mastered. So her progress was something she could literally see and hold. And I let the wins accumulate because each one was a piece of evidence against I can't, rebuilding her expectancy and blending words at the same time. Act 2 targeted the racialized cost. If succeeding felt to Jada like a betrayal of her identity, then my job was to make succeeding feel like an expression of it. Three moves. First, I put her in the story. I embedded her reading in text that included images of her so the reader on the page looked like the reader in the room. Second, I named the fear out loud. I gently probed whether being good at reading felt like a betrayal of who she is, which made a hidden, unspoken cost something we could actually talk about. And third, I rooted reading in the community. We talked about Black authors and about her foster family's own achievements, framing reading as a continuous with her identity as her community rather than a path away from it. Act 3 built value and deliberately joy, following the reframing that attainment and interest value can live and belong in collective joy rather than isolated task delight. I did three things. I tied reading to a goal she genuinely cares about. That's utility value made personal. So reading became a route to something she actually wanted. I made learning communal by inviting a friend to some sessions so success was shared rather than solitary. Belonging itself became a source of motivation. And I ended every single session by asking Jada to name one thing she had figured out herself, which handed her ownership of her own progress. She wasn't being taught to read so much as discovering that she was a reader. So what happened? The change was gradual, but everything moved together. The clearest sign was her language. She went from I can't read to I'm learning to read. The shift from a fixed verdict to a process is the whole ball game. Concretely, by the third session, she was blending constant vowel constant words on her own, unprompted. By the eighth, she was blending nonsense words and navigating between different vowel sounds. Real transfer, not memorization. Over the term, her teacher reported she was blending more words and her core reading assessment rose. And here's a detail I love. The classmate I invited to make learning communal kept attending on her own. The belonging worked on both of them. Let me turn this into something you can use because levers generalize far beyond one kindergarten reader. If anyone you support, a student, a mentee, a child, has started to give up on themselves, run their motivation through the same four moves. First, diagnose before you intervene. Is this really low expectancy, low value, or high cost? Applying the wrong fix to the wrong lever is exactly why well meaning efforts fail. Second, engineer mastery first. Nothing rebuilds I can like real felt success. So scaffold tasks small enough to guarantee an early win. Third, surface the hidden costs, especially racialized and identity costs. Actually ask what success might cost someone, socially, symbolically, or in their community. And fourth, root value and identity. Make succeeding an expression of who they are and where they belong, not a departure from it. I'll close with a lesson that will stay with me. Listen for what learners value and fear before you teach. I came into this assuming struggling learners mainly needed clearer instruction, but Jada's move from avoidance to ownership taught me that belief about achievement and about belonging often matters more than any lesson plan. The most powerful thing I can do as a motivation educator is diagnose the belief that actually stuck. Low expectancy, high cost, or absent value, and honor the identity that shapes it before you reach for the content. Thank you for watching.